It's definitely a great looking locomotive. There is plenty of power and grip. This is likely to be an absolutely sterling performer. The sound file that's preloaded onto the lock sound that comes with the factory fitted models is really good. A big hello to you. It's really great to see you. I do hope that you are well. I'm Jenny Kirk, welcoming you up here to Weir Yard, and today we're taking a look at an all-new tooled model of an old classic. It's the Heljan Class 47, and they've spent a lot of time and money in retooling this model from the ground up. It owes nothing of its heritage to what went before, and certainly this looks to be a really interesting model. It's packed with a lot of features, and Heljan very kindly sent over their review sample to the channel so we can get a good close look and see whether this is the definitive Class 47. So come with me and let's check it out, and don't forget that we've got an affiliate link down below taking you to Rails of Sheffield, where you can find the full range of the Heljan Class 47s available to order today. They've got a range of different liveries, and certainly there's something there for everybody, both sound fitted and DCC ready. But does this model match up? Does it make the grade? And is it an upgrade worthwhile from the previous versions that have gone before? Come with me, let's take a good close look. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfrabriek.co.uk. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
Now, the Class 47 is a ubiquitous locomotive. It's one of the most successful designs that have run on Britain's railways, with over 500 of these having been built, and it's estimated around 10% of those still around today, with a number having been converted through re-engineering to the Class 57. They're still giving good frontline sterling performance. But in model form, we've had quite a few different versions over the years, and what at first glance seems to be quite a simple design can be quite misleading. Previously, there's been criticisms of all of the different models from all of the different manufacturers. So Heljan have retooled this model from the ground up. And certainly it's been an interesting voyage of discovery, poring over so many photographs that I can find online of the prototype to try and get the definitive answer on how good this model is. So come with me and let's take a look at the review sample that Heljan have loaned to the channel for us to be able to see just how well they did the job. And don't forget to hit that like button and share this video to social media, and also subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. But let's get on and check out this Class 47. The Brush Type 4 or Class 47 has been one of the most successful designs of diesel locomotives to have run on Britain's railways. Designed and built in the 1960s, they have outlasted even locomotives that were delivered after them. Such was the durability and reliability of their design. It was one of the locomotives that Heljan produced in 00 fairly early on in their supplying models for the UK market. But this particular model owes nothing to that earlier example. Heljan have taken the time to revisit the design of locomotive and completely retooled this model from the ground up. And they very kindly loaned to the channel an example of the newest release of this Brush Type 4. The catalogue number on the box, this one says 4723, but this is actually the sound fitted version in the wrong box. It is the round robin review sample, so that does explain that. But this is really loaded with features, and it does show us all of that down underneath. DCC ready 21 pin, although factory fitted with a sound decoder. We've got working directional lights, interior lights, that includes cab and engine room. We've got speakers in there as well, NEM couplers, and it's quite interesting actually on the side here. We've got a listing here of premium features delivered as standard: LED lighting, sprung buffers, 5-pole motor, and cab and engine room lights listed there. It's the usual Heljan box, always really quite sturdy. I do like these newer style boxes. We've got rid of the plastic fantastic interiors, got rid of polystyrene, and instead we've got a strong durable box that actually is really easy to get the locomotive in and out of. As this loaner model is a Class 47 with sound, we've got the ESU lock sound sheet, and it does have the Lego Man Biffo sound profile, so you do know that you're getting something special.
Stand clear! Go on, Reverend, let her have it, come on! How very delightful!
We've got some information about the CVs and the function numbers, and what I like about this is that they have put the kind of functions that you're likely to want to use most regularly on the lower function numbers, and that's important when you've got something like an NCE or a Gauge Master controller where you only have the lower numbers easily accessible without having to play about with functions to get the higher function numbers. Another thing I like about these is we get our period looking operating manual, and this actually reminds me of the kind of magazines like Commercial Motor that my father had collected in the 1960s, and it's really got that lovely period feel, and it's little things like this which do then feel like there's a lot of extra effort gone into not just the production of this model but its presentation. We've got a little bit about the class history. The Brush Type 4 or Class 47 was one of the most numerous of the modern locomotives that BR built in the 1960s, 512 examples, and it just shows how reliable these locomotives turned out to be. It was part of a drive not just to eliminate steam traction, but also to eliminate some of the non-standard diesel designs that had been procured as part of the 1955 modernisation plan, and some of those had turned out to be not really all that successful. And the Class 47 was an attempt to standardise on fewer different types of classes, and that was a role that it did really well. There were also some experimental locomotives amongst the fleet. The Class 48s had a slightly different V-formation engine, although proved to be not quite as successful. And the Class 48s are being produced as a special, I think it's for Model Rail magazine. The initial delivery of Class 47s actually utilised engines and electrical gear that was for a cancelled order of Class 46s, and in some respects the Class 47 can be seen as a design iteration from the Peaks. The locomotive itself is pretty easy to free from the plastic clamshell packaging, and it's got a really reasonable weight to it. In fact, I'm just weighing this up, and certainly there's a lot of load down weight, no doubt tucked away in the chassis, which is really going to help the performance of this locomotive. Turning it over, let's start from the bottom. We've got what appears to be all-wheel pickup, although the drive for this locomotive is of an A1A design on each bogie. And what that effectively means is that the drive from the motor is driving the outer axles on each of the bogies, but the centre axle is an idler and will just turn freely. I've found in the past that whilst some modelers do complain about models that are provided with this kind of drive arrangement, I've not actually found it to be something that limits the haulage of any particular locomotive. It also means that we've got a lot of vertical height that the centre axle can play in, and that does mean that we get a much better track holding ability of the bogies as the locomotive makes its way around the track. The bogies themselves have a lot of relief detail to them. It's really good to see that we've got brake shoes that do line up with the wheel treads. And that is something which, whilst it does sound a bit of an oxymoron, of course they're supposed to, a lot of models don't quite seem to get this right. And the bogies are an area where quite often a lot of this relief detail is squeezed into a much thinner strata, which just aids it being produced as a one-piece moulding. But on this model, we appear to have a lot of additional detail parts that are added behind to give this great sense of depth between the primary and secondary suspension on these. The wheels themselves are blackened with black painted fronts, and they do match up quite well with the bogies such that you don't find that there's a jarring mismatch in colour. We've also got separately applied steps here lining up with the cabs, and an awful lot of additional quite fine detail at the front as part of what I presume to be brake rigging and such like. On the underside you can see that we've got slimline tension lock couplings, and these follow the standard Heljan practice with a spring-loaded piece, which can be removed if you want to completely get rid of it, but it is not too off-putting if you don't wish to fit the tension lock coupling. This is applied to both ends, and as per standard Heljan practice, we've got the full range of buffer beam detail is ready applied to both ends out of the box, so you don't have to mess about adding in lots of fiddly little bits from a detail pack. My personal preference is to leave the full detail at one end and trim at the other end to be able to get in the tension lock couplings, and this is just a personal preference that gives me, in my opinion, the best of both worlds. The buffers are sprung loaded, and they've actually got a reasonable amount of spring to them. They're not a lackluster spring, but not so hard as to be completely unusable. And we've got the particular front profile there you can see with the flat centres and then the mushrooming just around the edges. The front face of this locomotive does appear to be something that Heljan have captured reasonably well. From a distance, the Class 47 does appear to be quite box-like, but when you get in really close, you can see that there's a lot more to the shape. We've got the taper in at the ends, and even though these don't have any kind of a nose bonnet like the Class 46s, there is a kind of shelf there just underneath the windscreen, and I've looked long and hard at photographs online just trying to ascertain how well this is being captured. It does seem to be the feature that causes the most issue with other manufacturers' 47s as far as I can tell. And what I can see from the photographs compared with this model, it does seem to have been captured reasonably well. We don't have any huge rivet detail around the windscreens. Again, this matches up with prototype photographs reasonably well. I like the windscreen wipers that are in different parked positions on the glass. It's something that you see on real locomotives, that the windscreen wipers appear to be operated independently from each other, which means they don't necessarily line up neatly, and this has been captured well on the Heljan model. The glazing is nice and flush, and through those cab windows we can see all of that cab detail, which once we get the cab lights up and running, it will be really nice to see how well this shows through. We've got the domino head coat, really crisp and sharp finish on that, and the overhead warning flashes too, really nice and crisp. The handrails on this model feel to be metal, and that means that they're nice and durable, and even with handling they're not likely to get broken. The rest of the cab has the marker lights, and then we appear to have an additional high-intensity style light just down here. And I really do like the fact that we've got the correct colours on these hoses, and the plastic that they're made from does have a lot of nice flex. The buffer beam coupler is fitted and it is capable of being used fully functionally. It's made of metal, but if you use the tension lock couplings, I would recommend just trimming this off. It is an awful shame that Heljan don't provide an option for an abbreviated coupling hook just to be compatible with the slimline tension locks. It always does feel to be just a little bit of sacrilege to cut that off a model. The top of the cab roof, we've got this correct dome, and then the air vent just on there, and that entire shape does seem to be pretty reasonably captured. We've got some more detail at the front and an antenna, and I do like this cantrail stripe that is really quite crisp and clean, that demarks the edge between the black and the very dark grey. It steps down and follows along the body side. Looking closely to the differentiation between the different colours, this is crisp and sharp. Yellow is often the area which has just that little bit of fuzziness on some models, but it is pretty crisp and clean on this model. Moving further back, 47125, the running number, is really cleanly applied, and I do like these silver BR double arrows that are printed on the side. Now I'm just going to have a quick look into the detail bag. These are supplied with every locomotive. We've got the slimline tension locks, and then we also get the 3-piece snow plows too, which are another item that can be added. But we don't have any etched nameplates or BR double arrows. I must admit, in this area I almost never apply these to models, so if they're kept out to help keep the price down a little bit, I'm actually all for that. The sectorization livery on the side is really nicely done. We've got the blue and the yellow, and there doesn't appear to be any bleed over between the two. It's a really nice tempo printed finish on there, although we do still seem to get just like a little bit of a line where the grey and the light grey meet up with each other, and that just carries on through the top of the logo, but actually it's not really a problem at all. We do have the engine room access windows, and these have some really quite fine rivet detail around them. Inside there we've got a representation of what would actually be in the engine room, although on this example, out of the box, we do seem to have an errant wire, which does seem to have fallen down, but it's probably no difficult thing to move that out of the way. The roof vents on this model are captured nicely, and there's a lot of extra detail up here. We've got the roof fans behind this grille mesh, and they are really quite sharp and very, very noticeable. We have the engine room access hatches, and these are correctly picked out in the cream. Again, really sharp colour differentiation, and there's no blurring between the different colours. The exhaust port is actually quite nice and deep, and it's all painted, as far as I can see, it looks black down there. I don't know whether that's actually the inside of the workings or whether that is actually a recess in the plastic that's painted, but it does just work. It gives a great sense of depth. We've got a correctly plated over port at this end, and what I really do like up here is we've got these almost like lifting eyes. These are metal and quite durable, and something that I've not seen before on other brands of Class 47s. Working down the body side, we've got correctly finished the engine room access door and these steps that work up the side. They're recessed into the body and really quite slender, just as per the prototype, and again another overhead warning flash. The Tonnidae nameplate is printed on with the Shell logo really crisp and sharp. Again, as I said before, there doesn't feel a need to have separate etched nameplates on these. The quality of the printing is so crisp and sharp that it actually does just work as is, and it's one less thing to find to be fiddly, to accidentally break off, or to leave glue marks whilst trying to apply. Again, we've got another engine room window here, and we've got more detail inside. Engine room lights are something which I've always been quite sceptical of, but on this locomotive there's actually something to see inside. At the rear cab we've got this blue and yellow chevron effect as per the prototype, again nice and crisp, and then we've got metal cab handrails. The cab door doesn't open, but actually I find that to be something of a gimmick on locomotives where it does. Again, more flush glazing, and I really do like this diagonal style shed logo plate with its leaping. I can only assume that's something like a tiger or a leopard. It's a really nice effect. I'm no expert on these plates, but that really does look the business. The other end of the model, again, we've got all the detail that we saw at the other. The windscreen wipers at this end are parked together in this V style, slightly different from the other end. I do like that that has come out, just giving a little bit of variety to the model. Looking at the underside, the underframe detail really is exquisitely done. There's a lot of separately fitted parts on here, and we've got a number of different pieces that are picked out in both the yellow and the orange as per the prototype. There's some additional pipework back here in the white, and it really does look good. The relief detail is crisp and sharp, and because these are separately fitted parts, we do get a really great sense of depth to the detail. A slight brushing over with weathering, something like weathering powders just to give a sense of grime. Not too much, you don't want your locomotive looking like it's in a scrap line, but I think it would really bring out some of this detail nicely. Looking for things that Heljan have got wrong is quite tricky. The real locomotives, there were 512 of them, and they got modified during their life, so it's quite difficult to find a photograph of the precise locomotive at the precise point in time that is shown in this model. That said, there were a couple of areas that I've been able to identify. For me, on the front of this locomotive, the small steps that can be seen either side of the high-intensity headlight and below the domino look to be inboard of the edges of the domino head code box, whereas on the prototypes they all seem to be slightly outboard of that. It's just a minor thing, but certainly with all the looking that I've done comparing the model to photographs, that was one of the areas I was able to identify. An area that Heljan do seem to have got quite right is that lip, where there's the most smallest of protrusions underneath the cab windows. This seems to vary quite wildly in different manufacturers' models, and on the Heljan one it does seem to match up to the photographs of real Class 47s that I've found. When it comes to these roof hatches, it must be said that there's a little bit of difficulty in finding roof details of Class 47s. When I did find them, they tended to be taken from a distance, and as such it was really difficult to see any great detail in this area. What I did notice is that there appeared to be a split between the left and right side of each of these hatches, so effectively we're looking at what appear to be 4 hatches rather than 2 as modelled on this locomotive. But it must be said that they're not entirely distinctive. There is a seam visible, but it's really hard to tell whether it's just a dimple in the metal plating or whether these really should be 4 rather than 2. There is a huge minefield trying to compare this locomotive to other manufacturers' models because it's never quite so obvious who actually got things right and who got things wrong. But in this area, I do believe that the Heljan model looks better than the alternatives, but doesn't get it entirely right. The photographs of the real locomotives do seem to show this one homogeneous area of roof panels, but there is a visible seam down the middle, which suggests that it's 4 rather than 2, and I am going to point that out. From certain angles in the exhaust port you can see the electronics board in there, but from a lot of angles it just looks like nice and black and deep. And it is something of a little bit of a shame, but a tiny amount of black paint in there shouldn't cause any harm to the circuit board, but will touch up that wire. When it comes to comparing in reviews the models from other manufacturers, I tend to try and avoid doing this. However, because people will ask, here it is nose to nose with a Bachmann Class 47. You can see that the buffers on the Bachmann 47 appear to be slightly higher, as is the base of the body. It must be said though that the Bachmann 47 seen here is a slightly different variant, and the cowl that appears over the buffer beam is not something that was replicated on all members of the class at all times, and to that end, this configuration also appears quite readily in photographs that I've seen. When it comes to deciding the difference in height between these two models, it's again difficult to tell who got it right and who got it wrong, but what I will say is when I compare the Heljan model to a vast variety of other locomotives, its buffers match up exactly with the right height, not just with other Heljan locomotives, but with those from 3 other manufacturers that I tried as well. I think it's safe to say that no manufacturer has yet released the definitive Class 47, but the Heljan model certainly comes quite close. It won't look out of place next to the rest of your fleet, be that older Heljan models or those from other manufacturers, and certainly for somebody who only really has a passing knowledge of the class, it's definitely a great looking locomotive. And you need to be careful when you look at photographs online of models, because the camera can lie, and some of the huge discrepancies that have been shown on internet fora and Facebook groups do appear to be more down to the angles that the model is photographed at, rather than the model itself having any great issues. Overall, this is a great effort from Heljan. The decoration on the review sample that they sent to the channel really is crisp and sharp. The crispness of the detail too is really quite nice, and there's a lot of extra detail which I could not find on the other Class 47s I have in my fleet from other manufacturers. When comparing it extensively to photographs online, it's actually really difficult to put a finger on anything that is too wrong. There are a couple of areas, such as the steps at the front or those roof engine room hatches, but these are still fairly minor issues, and I only found them by really looking for them. Anybody who really goes out of their way to criticize this model, really, unless you're a P4 modeler, you should remember that you're still running your entire layout on narrow gauge tracks. Even though this is a DCC sound fitted model, when putting it on the DC test track, it immediately fired up the lights and the sounds. Moving off wasn't instantaneous, and it went through what appeared to be a kind of startup process, and it's a really nice touch that allows DC modelers to also enjoy the benefits of DCC sound. But it must be noted that you do have to be careful in terms of not having high frequency track cleaners on your track, and you do need to have a DC controller that doesn't spike the voltage like some of the older and less well regulated ones may do. For DCC fitting, you will need a 21-pin decoder, and whilst this model is DCC sound fitted, I am going to open it up, ostensibly to show you how the socket works inside, but also just to move that little bit of a wire which is dropped down in front of the cab side windows. Looking on the underside, just need to move the bogies to one side, and we've got a screw there. Moving to the other side, another screw there. Same again up at this end. It's quite a light thread. It doesn't feel like these are excessively torqued inside the model. And it's quite a welcome thing. It does feel like they're going into proper receptacles for the screws rather than trying to cut their own screw hole into the plastic. We can then just wiggle the body free and just be very careful. We've got some lights for the cab lights, so we've got some very slender wires that go between the two, and it's just important to make sure that we don't pull and stress those. Inside the model you can see the recesses for iPhone style speakers. These are actually really neatly placed and already in their enclosures here at this end. All of the wiring actually plugs in with these sockets, which is nice to see. It does make maintenance really easy. The cab interiors are a joy to behold. I'm sure that once we get the cab lights fired up, these will show through really nicely, but I just want to show you just how much there is in there to see when we've got the body off. The full control desk, all the different colours are picked out. And this bulkhead at the back, I really love that. We've got a kind of coppery brass colour, reds, whites, blacks, greys. Everything is going on there. It's one of the best interior cab details that I've ever seen. The 21-pin socket is here in the middle, on this model fitted with an ESU lock sound. We've got a centrally mounted 5-pole motor with 2 extensive brass flywheels, and then drive to the bogie towers from each end. There's no working fans, but we do get really quite a nice representation of both of those, and they sit straight over where the speakers are to make the most of the sound getting through. Once you've fitted your decoder, it's just simply a case of putting the body back on. Make sure that none of these wires are either dropped down in front of the windows or are likely to get snagged on the screws, and then it's off to the programming track, where by default your decoder will be set to address 3, and you can change that to whatever suits your particular system. Now that we've got the body back on, I just want to fit a coupling to one end. It does seem sacrilege to remove the detail from both ends, so I'm going to just fit the coupling to this end. I've already gone ahead and just very carefully trimmed all of the buffer beam detail. Can then add one of the slimline tension locks that come in the packet, and again it's good to see that Heljan have done away with the old cranked style ones, which would often leave the couplings just a little bit on the low side. Just make sure you get it lined up and then clunk click every trip, and there we have the coupling in place. And now it's off to the main test track and see just how well this performs. When it comes to running on Weir Yard, the model performed really well. There is plenty of power and grip with this model, and just as I said at the start, the fact that it's an A1A power arrangement on each bogie really doesn't impinge upon its pulling power in the slightest. It romped away with my very long test train, which includes a variety of different coach types and certainly taxes many locomotives. There was no hint of wheel spin, and the acceleration was really quite smooth, and even when decelerating there was no sign of hunting, and the back EMF runs just perfectly on this model. It's quite apparent that it could have pulled an awful lot more had I taxed it with it, and really this is likely to be an absolutely sterling performer on your layout. Through all of the point work, the model really had no issues whatsoever. The fact that it also doesn't have an onboard stay alive doesn't really have any bearing whatsoever on its ability to run through even the most dodgily of laid track. It took in Insulfrog and Electrofrog points, double slips, the works, and really there wasn't even a stutter or a slight flicker to any of the lighting, showing that that all-wheel pickup really was more than enough to keep this model moving. All in all, performance on the track was spectacular, and it's certainly a huge plus point on this model. The sound file that's preloaded onto the lock sound that comes with the factory fitted models is really good. I'm going to run through now some of the different sounds on this, and it should be noted that we do have options for things like drive hold, which allows you to rev the engine without moving the locomotive, and then we've also got the startup sequence, which happens automatically when you hit F1. So we turn now to the scores, and first up is build quality, and this is an area where the model has done very, very well. There's a lot of fine detail, and in particular I was worried about some of this underframe detail. In the past I have had models which, with a bit of handling and some squeezing in this area accidentally, some of the glue joins have broken free, but not on this model. It does appear that the underframe detail is very cleverly designed to be a one-piece part, so we remove any of the possible weak spots whilst at the same time not compromising any of the detail, which is really good to see. The front end detail too, we've got a lot of metal handrails, and these make sure that even with rough handling, nothing is coming free and nothing is breaking and snapping. Same goes for the handrails on the cab. And the windscreen wipers too, whilst slender and separately fitted, they don't have any issues with breaking free from the model, which I've had in the past, so that is another good plus point. The only area of detail which seems to have come loose on this model is just one of these fine little details up here on the roof fence. But it has to be borne in mind that this is the round robin loaner model, which has done the rounds of magazines before it got to me. And that means that I think that has come from previous unsympathetic handling, and I'm going to give it a bit of a pass on that. I think that it was like that straight out of the box. I have checked in the box. The part was not in there, so I suspect that one of the magazines may have accidentally caused this. So that gives a score of 9.6. When it came to running quality, this model really did outperform expectations. I was initially just a little bit worried about the A1A wheel arrangement on the bogies, but that was not borne out by putting it on the track, where it handled the test train with remarkable ease. It romped away really quite smoothly with those dual brass flywheels and the 5-pole motor, making sure that we had a really smooth pickup, even going at a crawl, and there was plenty of grip. There was no flickering of the lights either, and even though there's no onboard stay alive, quite frankly, this model showed that it really did not need it in the slightest, and it just goes to show that you can get a model that works perfectly even over insel frog points and could haul anything that was put on the drawbar. So I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. On DCC fitting and innovation, well, the DCC fit really is quite easy. I do like the screws on the Heljan models. They go into a kind of brass collar rather than using self-tappers into the plastic. What does this mean? Well, it means that getting them on and off is really remarkably simple. You don't need to put a lot of force through the screws. It means that the screws themselves are not prone to either stripping the thread or stripping the heads, and that makes getting the body on and off a lot easier. Inside we've got a lot of plug connectors too, which does make maintenance and adding any customization in terms of lighting really quite easy. The cab lighting is really good, and the brightness is, in my view, just right. The only thing was that on this model it did seem that the engine room lights and the cab lights did seem to have been transposed, and I couldn't find a way of turning on just the engine room lights. And I think that might be down to this being a pre-production sample, but I don't know that for certain. Certainly the listing shows that it should have a separate engine room lights and cab lights, and looking on the inside we do appear to have these, but for whatever reason the ESU lock sound decoder that's factory fitted in this does seem to only turn everything on at once. There's not really anything to detract. I do like the sharpness of the printing. Certainly on this model is some quite complex livery application on here, and while some people might balk at the fact that there's no etched nameplates, I don't think it needs them. Certainly the quality of this print really is crisp and sharp, and certainly the same for some of the branding too. So I'm going to give this a 9.7. So we come now to accuracy and quality of finish. This is an area where online there's a lot of debate going on, and I think that some of it does appear to be born out of a tribal loyalty for one brand over another, rather than comparing the model to photographs of the prototype. I've tried to do just that, and actually it's really difficult to find specific photographs that give a definitive answer to certain aspects of the body shape. The Class 47s were not built by robots. They were hand-built, albeit on jigs, and that means that there are differences between different members of the class. Add to that there are rebuilds, repairs, all manner of changes went on during the lifetime of these locomotives, and it also stands to reason that a lot of enthusiasts didn't go out of their way to photograph such rudimentary detail as looking down on the roof, and that proved particularly difficult to source. What I can say is that the shape matches up well, and areas that I particularly looked at, such as the cab fronts, I felt that the front of this lip underneath the cab windows was particularly well represented on the Heljan model. There is a size difference between the Heljan model and those from the other manufacturer's stable, but it has to be said, I'm not 100% sure which is right and which is wrong. What I do know is that on the cab front we've got a couple of steps down here either side of the high intensity headlight and underneath the domino head code box. On the photographs I've found of the real locomotives, these are slightly further out so that they protrude beyond the end of the domino. That is not quite accurate on the fronts of these, but it really is something you have to go hunting for to be able to find, and the average enthusiast would probably never have known if this hadn't been included as part of this video. On the roof of the model, the other area which really did take a lot of tracking down because photographs seem very hard to come by, is this engine roof access panel. Now, as far as I can tell, this should be at the very least divided into 4, and there doesn't appear to be a representation of this. But there is a caveat. It's very subtle, and I really did have to go hunting. As far as I can tell, these roof panels are the right shape and size, and the only thing they're lacking is a seam in the middle which divides them into 4. Comparing it with the models I've got from another manufacturer, they got it very wrong, with divided out into 4 very distinctly separate panels, and on that I think that the Heljan model certainly looks better compared to the photographs that I've seen. The fans are really nice, and with the positioning of the speakers that's really good, although if you buy the DCC ready model the speakers are not in there, although the recesses to take them are, and it takes a standard size of speaker. There is a small amount of wire and circuit board visible from one particular angle when I look down the exhaust port, but you really have to go looking for it. The only other area which had a little bit of an issue is there seems to be some wires which, despite my best efforts, and it seems despite Heljan's best efforts, seem determined to fall down in front of these windows, and without actually going in and securing them in position with something like Captain tape, they seem to be really quite loving getting in the light there. But again, another minor issue. So I'm going to give this a 9.0. On value for money, well, we've got a price point of £212 for the DCC Ready model and £297 for the full sound fitted example, and that includes the extra twin speakers as part of that installation. For an ESU lock sound decoder with a Lego Man Biffo sound profile and those twin speakers already installed, that actually is a great value upgrade to go for the full sound version. As you heard in this video, the sounds really are good, as you would expect from Lego Man Biffo, and I thought that that was a particularly good upgrade to be had. Now, let's not get away from the fact that these models are expensive, but when we're looking at recently announced models from other manufacturers cresting the £300 mark before you even get beyond DCC Ready, it does seem that these are pretty much towards the lower end of what you would expect for a very thoroughly retooled model. So I'm going to give this a 7.6, and that gives us a final score of 45.9. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video and found it informative, and certainly it's been very interesting looking over not just this Heljan model, but taking a look at the competition and also photographs of the real thing. It's a complex area, and my personal thoughts are that Heljan have done incredibly well with this model. The cab front for me is almost all pretty good. There's some areas where the previous offerings didn't quite get it right, that Heljan does seem to have pulled it back. The only areas on the cab front which really stood out for me are those steps at the bottom being slightly too far in. But the only reason I know about this is because I've been studying so many photographs, and for the average modeler it just didn't really feel like a serious issue. Up on the roof of the model, those access hatches missed out on the seam that appeared to be present on the photographs I could find, but actually finding photographs of the roof of the Class 47 was really difficult, and my conclusion was that Heljan got much closer to the prototype than the other models that were on the market. When it comes to other areas, I really do love that cab, with the bright light on the inside really shows off that cab interior. And that's one of the things, if you're going to have cab lighting, you need to have a really good cab to show for it, and Heljan have managed just that. I do like the detailing of the engine room too. So with models fitted with engine room lights, there's no point in lighting all that up if all you see is circuit board inside, and certainly there is something to look at. But I'm not really a huge fan of engine room lights, because it's not really something that I feel adds a huge amount to the operational interest. The bogies on this model were really good. They would benefit from a little bit of light weathering, but there's plenty of detail, and the depth of that detail is good, and importantly the brake blocks do line up with the wheel treads. The A1A wheel arrangement on this model did raise a few eyebrows at the start when I first started investigating it, but actually don't worry about that. The model performs really well with plenty of grip, and it romped around Weir Yard with actually quite a long test train that's probably far in excess of what most people would tax it with. And in terms of pickups, it performed faultlessly, didn't need a stay alive, and there was not a flicker from any of the lights or a stutter from any of the sound. So all in all, I thought that this is a really good model that Heljan have certainly made a great effort on. It's not 100%, but then again, neither is the competition, and it's definitely a much better model than what's gone before. But I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. Do leave a comment, let me know what you think, especially if you know your Class 47 Duffs inside and out. What is your verdict on these models? Do leave a comment down below, and it's a great place to share your experience and knowledge with your fellow enthusiasts and help them out to make the best choice. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling, bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfrabriek.co.uk. Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double-O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com, and don't miss out on your latest logo.
I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/JenniferKirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.